Hello and welcome to my channel if you're new here, and welcome back if you've been here before. In this video, I'm going to do a cook with me for meals that are themed towards Fridays. If you're a traditional Catholic like me, then every Friday is a meatless meal. If you're not a traditional Catholic, then we're getting ready to head into Lent, so Ash Wednesday and every Friday during Lent is a meatless meal Friday. And so I'm going to go over with you some of my favorite meatless meals. The first one is a cauliflower pizza, the second one is broccoli and cheese soup, and the third one is fried seasoned salmon. Now I plan on doing another video with some more recipes that are sort of favorites in the family, and look for that one coming up. It'll probably be in about a week or two, but these first three recipes should hold you for the time being. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below, and if you could please hit the like button on this video, and I'll see you at the end of the video. The first recipe is cauliflower pizza, so it's a crust made out of cauliflower. So this is good both for keto, it's good for a gluten-free diet, not good for a dairy-free diet, however. But these are the basic ingredients. The cauliflower, eggs, and Parmesan cheese will all go into the crust. The spaghetti sauce or tomato sauce and the cheese is used for the toppings, and you can put on whatever other toppings that you would like. The first step is taking the plastic off of the cauliflower and trying to break off the green leaves that are on the cauliflower. I typically rinse my cauliflower first and then try and take off the green leaves. And if they give you a little bit of trouble, basically once I've taken off as many as I can with my hand, that's when I'll get out the knife and I'll sort of start to cut around the base of where the core is and see if I can get some of the green leaves off that way. So as you see here, I was able to cut off that base, which allowed me to see better, and now I'm just cutting out that core, which will take a lot of what's left of the green with it. And anything else that's left of the green, I'll try and peel off before I start cutting the cauliflower into chunks. Once you get the cauliflower all cleaned up, now the star of the show becomes the grater. I like to put my grater into a bowl so it catches everything that grates down. And basically you just start grabbing pieces of the cauliflower and running against the grater. I run it against the larger side. As you can see, at first I tried grating with my left hand so that you could see better because I'm right-handed. But that wasn't working out so well, so I just went ahead and switched and tried to give you a decent view of a section of the cauliflower being grated on the grater. And as you grate it, you'll probably notice, like if you're using larger chunks, that they start to come apart a bit, and then you can just take those smaller chunks and grate that. And out of grating the entire head of cauliflower, I got probably about 6 or 7 cups. I only use really 2 to 4 cups depending on how large a recipe I'm making. For this particular pizza pie crust, I decided to double the batch and use 4 cups to make it an extra large pie crust, but the original recipe only calls for 2. So in this case, I'm going to grate down the entire cauliflower head, and that way I'll have extra left over, which I will bag up and freeze. But in the meantime, I'm just grating this cauliflower down. As you can see, it grates down nicely, and this is basically what's called riced cauliflower. You can actually buy it in the store in the frozen section as riced cauliflower. So now that I'm done grating it all, or at least as much as I need to at the moment, I'm going to measure out the 4 cups and I'm going to put that in a pan. And basically the concept is you're going to heat it on pretty much a medium heat, possibly low as it gets going. The whole purpose is not to cook it, but basically just to cook some of the water out of it, because cauliflower has a lot of water in it and you don't want a lot of water when you're making the pizza crust. So you'll put it in the pan and you'll put it on probably about a medium or so heat, and you'll just stir periodically, and that will help get the moisture out of it. And once you think it's cooked down enough, go ahead and remove it from the heat at that point. And now the next step in this preparation is to take your pizza pan. I like using a cast iron, so I put that in the oven and I put it for preheat. The recipe actually calls for a temperature of 400, but I put it to 425 initially, and then I lowered it down later. Out of the times that I've cooked this, I would probably just stick with going ahead with the 400 instead of the 425 because it did make the bottom, well, it stuck together better. It made it a little bit more burnt tasting. And so at this point you move on to, you have the cauliflower off the burner, at least the burner turned off so it can cool now because you don't want it to be hot when you put it in. And now on to the rest of the crust. So you're going to start out with 2 eggs for the doubled recipe, and you're going to want to beat those in the bowl. If you're just doing a single recipe, the smaller batch, it'll be 1 egg and 1 cup of Parmesan cheese. But because I'm doubling it, I'm doing 2 eggs and 2 cups of Parmesan cheese. So as you see here, I've just broken the eggs into the bowl. You beat those eggs, and you want the eggs beaten before you add the Parmesan cheese in because the Parmesan cheese and the eggs are going to mix together and will start sort of the basis for this crust. So you want those two mixed together. It's almost like the glue that holds the cauliflower. Now it's time for the Parmesan cheese. Like I said, you're going to want to add 1 cup of Parmesan cheese per egg. And so since I'm doubling this recipe, I'm going to put in 2 cups of Parmesan cheese, and yeah, a little bit spilled out of the cup when I was putting it in for the 1 cup, but since the 1 cup measurement wasn't full, it really didn't bug me, and a little Parmesan cheese isn't going to hurt an already good recipe. So I got those 2 cups measured out, and next is the process of mixing that because you're going to want to combine them thoroughly before you add in the cauliflower. Now this is the point where you start adding the cauliflower into the egg and cheese mixture. So I basically just use the spatula to scoop it up out of the pan and get as much of the cauliflower into the bowl as I can. I mean, if a little bit doesn't make it, that's not a big deal. But I just try and scoop out and then scrape out as much of it as I can, so that way I can mix it all together to make the crust. This is the point where you'll combine the egg and cheese mixture with the cauliflower, and it really starts to form the crust. And so you're going to want to get the cauliflower as much coated as possible with the egg and cheese mixture, so that way it gets cohesive and it sticks together. Now if it doesn't all stick together, I wouldn't worry about it, because when you get the pan out of the oven to cook it on there, or at least to pour out the crust onto the pan and spread it out, the cheese is going to start cooking and it's going to start melting, and so everything will stick together really nicely. So this is basically just to try and get the cauliflower as coated as possible with that cheese, and the cheese is going to get coated by the egg, and it's like a nice little glue factor that happens with the food. It makes everything stick together to turn it into a nice cauliflower crust. Now at this point you have the cast iron pan out of the oven, so it preheated with the oven, it's all hot, and you're just going to start pouring the crust batter out of the bowl and onto the cast iron pan, and then once you get it all out of the bowl, that's when you're going to go and mash it down. I use a fork. I think it works better than a spoon because the crust doesn't stick to a fork as much as it does a spoon. I've tried both. I've tried a spoon, both metal and wooden, and I've tried a fork, and I just find that using the metal fork works better for spreading it out and mashing it down. And while you're spreading it out and mashing it down, like I said, the pan's really hot. It's been in a 400-degree oven for several minutes because it's the time that the oven took to preheat, and then while you were also putting everything together for the crust. So it's had time to get really hot, and so the cheese is just going to start melting while you're patting it out, which will make it easier to pat it down and spread it, because the crust is going to start forming as you're patting it down. And you're not going to really have to like just wait for it to come together, because when the cheese is melting, it's starting to get thicker and it's starting to come together and stick more because the cheese is kind of like a glue. And it'll spread nicely. So I do recommend using a metal fork as opposed to like a spoon or something, because it won't stick as much to the fork and it will make it easier to spread it out and pat it down. You definitely don't want to use your hands, because as tempting as that is, this pan is hot and you don't want a chance touching it. And the cast iron pan works really, really well. I haven't tried another type of pan for this recipe, but I know the original recipe that I got this from, that guy uses a cast iron too. Now, once you've got it all patted down, just go ahead and pop it in the oven, and you're going to want to put it in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes, so that way the crust has time to cook in there and get just sort of, solid, because you don't want a soggy crust. So now this is the crust out of the oven. The reason why it's a little bit browner on top than it normally is because I had it at 425. When I looked back at my recipe, I realized I had it up 25 degrees more than I should have, so I lowered it back down while it was in the oven, but it still got a little bit browner on top than I intended. At this point, you start adding your toppings. So I like to use Prego because I like vegetables in my sauce. So I put that on there, and I'll spread that out. Once I get the sauce on there, that's when I start doing the toppings. So the ingredients for the toppings for me are typically sauce. If I'm doing a veggie pizza, which is most commonly what I do because I usually do this pizza on a Friday, I do cheese. If I have them available, I will do black olives. I almost always do onions. If I have them, I'll do red peppers. Sometimes I have mushrooms on hand, and I'll use that. So it's kind of like a veggie supreme pizza, because it's got pretty much every veggie that I could think of to put on a pizza that'll taste good, but no meat. Naturally, because it's being prepared on a Friday. And like I said in the intro, this isn't just for, say, Fridays during Lent. We're traditional Catholics, so we don't eat meat on Fridays in general. And it's got the benefit of being keto, because there's no bread in it, so there's no carbs, or at least minimal carbs, because there are some carbs in cauliflower. You just can't get away from them. But the sauce might have some carbs in it, but I really don't sweat those. It's worth it for the flavor of the Prego and the vegetables in it. And so after I got the sauce all spread out, that's when I'll start putting on the cheese, because the cheese always goes on first, and then the other toppings, and then I'll usually put cheese on again after that. Now once all the toppings are on, it goes back into the oven, usually for about another 10 minutes or so. I'll check on it to make sure that the cheese is all melted and maybe slightly browned on top. And then once that's done, I'll go ahead and pull it out of the oven. And usually before cutting it and serving it, once I have it out, I'll let it sit for about 10 minutes or so, kind of like what I do with lasagna, in order to let the cheese sort of cool off and solidify some. Because I've noticed that if I cut it immediately and try and serve it out, the cheese where I cut it will just all go back together because it's that hot and that melted. So usually give it about 10 minutes or so to let it cool. Then it's ready to cut and serve, and it is absolutely delicious when you serve it. Next up is broccoli and cheese soup. This is also a keto recipe. I think I might have done a video on this one before, but I'm not for certain. So basically the ingredients are broccoli, sharp cheddar cheese, garlic, and onion, vegetable broth, and if you have it, I use cream cheese, or you can use heavy whipping cream. And so the first thing you do is you're going to put the garlic, the chopped onion, and butter into the pot, and you're going to let all those cook. So as you can see here, I'm chopping up the onion that's going to go into the soup. I sometimes will put the butter and garlic in first, especially if I have garlic to use in the garlic press, but this time I didn't have it, and I wouldn't have probably messed around with it at that point anyway. So I just scooped the garlic because that's what I had, and I put that in the pot with the onion, and then I'll add the butter in and let that start to cook. You're going to cook the onions and garlic with the butter until the onions turn kind of translucent or tender. You're going to use 2 tablespoons of butter for this. You could probably use 3 and be fine, but I used 2 tablespoons for this. So it'll be the 2 tablespoons of butter, the garlic, probably about 3 cloves. I do about 2 tablespoons of the minced garlic from the container because we like garlic a lot. And then the onion was basically just 1 small onion. You could probably use 2 if you needed to, but I find that 1 small onion does the job. But just stir that around, get the butter melted, get the onion cooking so it turns kind of translucent. You can generally smell the mixture of the onion and the garlic, and it starts to smell really good. While that's cooking, you can go ahead and rinse off the broccoli. I usually use the already cut broccoli in the 2-pound bags from Sam's Club, so I rinse that off in a colander in the sink, and then place the colander into a bowl and take that over to the counter. And then as I go through, I'll usually cut the ends off the broccoli where it looks a little bit, brownish, and it also allows the broccoli to free up a little bit, so that way when it's cooking the little stems will break apart. Now back over to the pot, we give the onions and the garlic a little bit of a stir, and then we'll shift back over to the broccoli, which we're going to get ready to put into the pot. And you can either put the broccoli in or the broth in. It really doesn't matter which one you put in first. This time I decided to go ahead and put the broth in since the onions had cooked so well, and then put the broccoli in so that way the liquid was already there for it to cook in. I've done it before where I've tossed the broccoli in first and then put the broth in. It honestly really doesn't make a difference in the process. Now once you get the broccoli into the pot, you want to go ahead and let it come to a boil, and once it gets all bubbly, then just let it go ahead and cook at more of a medium simmer for about 15 minutes or so. You're just going to want to watch it periodically and give it a little bit of a stir to make sure that the broccoli is getting tender, because that's the point of it. Cooking in there with the broth is to get the broccoli tender, and once the broccoli is tender, that's when you can move on to the next step. Now the broccoli is nice and tender, so at this point you can either add a cup of heavy whipping cream or you can add 8 ounces of cream cheese. Now I've done both versions of this. So I've done the cream cheese and I've done the heavy whipping cream. And the whole reason why I knew about the cream cheese is because I'd made this at one point, forgotten to buy the heavy whipping cream, and then saw when I looked it up that you can use cream cheese as a substitute for heavy whipping cream because it's basically just a cheese version of heavy whipping cream. And when I made it with the cream cheese, my husband commented that actually tasted better to him, like creamier and thicker. So now when I make it, I don't sweat it if I don't happen to have the heavy whipping cream. I just use the cream cheese, and we pretty much always have at least some cream cheese in the refrigerator. You're going to want to stir that in really well so that way it gets all incorporated, and once it's all combined, that's when you get the sharp cheddar cheese. And you want it to be sharp because that's what adds the flavor. And you're going to use about 2 cups of that for this recipe, and as you can see here, I didn't really get out a measuring cup or anything to measure it in. I kind of eyeballed it because at this point I know roughly what 2 cups looks like, and I was going to also add it so that when I looked at the soup it looked like it was mixing in well and getting thick, and you could tell by the change of the texture and the creaminess of the soup. So I added the first batch in that was probably more like 1.5 cups, and then I added a little bit more cheese in to make it creamier, and that way I could see that the cheese was really mixing in well and incorporating and getting thicker. And you're also going to use some of the shredded cheddar cheese on top of the bowl of soup. So once you get a bowl, you'll keep some of the cheese for garnish. And so that wraps up meal number 2, the broccoli and cheese soup. Now on to the fried salmon. My husband actually does this one, and he does a really, really good job of it. Now this is just 2 pieces of salmon that he picked up at Sam's Club, and he uses this lemon pepper seasoning. I had never used it before he introduced me to it, and it's delicious, and he does an excellent job of it, so I always have him cook this one. The salmon that has the skin on it actually tastes a little bit better to me than just the plain salmon without the skin on it, but either one works. And so he just basically makes sure to get a good coating of the seasoning on either side of both pieces of salmon, and then in the pan we'll have coconut oil because that's what we like to use, particularly on this sort of thing in the household. On some more Italian dishes we'll use olive oil, but on salmon patties, and if I make, for instance, a cake or something, I'll either use butter or coconut oil because it tastes really good and it has a lot of benefits. So as you can see here, he turned the pan onto about a medium heat, got some coconut oil going in the pan, and then he's going to take the 2 pieces of salmon and lay them in the pan. He cooks each side for about 5 minutes, and he does 3 rotations. So he'll start out on one side, and then after it's cooked for a bit, usually around 5 minutes, then he'll flip both pieces, and then he'll come back again in 5 more minutes and flip the pieces again. So they're continuing to cook evenly. And the bottom part of the salmon, where it's thinner, tends to cook faster and will also tend to break off. So he'll usually end up scooping that out sooner than he does the larger pieces. As you can see here, he's done 2 flips, so at that point it's been 10 minutes cooking. And now the thinner pieces have cooked really well, so he'll go ahead and scoop those out and put those on the plate, and then allow the 2 larger pieces to cook for about 5 more minutes or so before he does the flip here again. And this will be the last stretch of the cooking before he takes it all out of the pan. As you can see there, he's decided at that point it's done, so he turns off the burner and goes ahead and puts the pieces on the plate. And he likes the juices, as he likes to call them, and so he'll scoop out all the pieces and allow some of the juices that are in the pan to come out onto the salmon too. We usually serve this salmon with a side of mashed potatoes, so that goes really well with it. So that wraps up the 3 meals for this video. I'm going to try and do another one with 3 more meal ideas I have for Fridays, but in the meantime this should hold you over. So I hope that these recipes were helpful for you, and I hope you give them a try and that you enjoy them. If you haven't yet, please click the subscribe button down below, and if you like this video, please make sure to click the like button. And if you haven't, click the little bell next to the subscribe button once you subscribe, so that way YouTube will let you know when I have more videos up. And I will see you in my next video.